There is a quiet problem at the edges of official history. It appears whenever we stop looking at dates and start looking at stone. In the 19th century, we are told, societies were still learning how to industrialize. Most cities relied on manual labor, animal power, simple tools. Short lifespans for buildings meant to last only decades. And yet, across continents, structures appear that do not behave like that world. Buildings whose scale feels out of place. Walls whose precision suggests patience measured in centuries, not budgets. Foundations sunk so deep they were never meant to be seen. This is the contradiction. If the 19th century built these things, why do they resemble nothing else from that century? Some structures are too large to be practical, too heavy to be efficient, too carefully aligned to be accidental. Train stations built like temples, courthouses with columns taller than necessity, public halls that echo like cathedrals, though no prayers were planned inside. They arrive suddenly in the historical record, fully formed, already weathered, already ancient in posture. There are no sketches showing experimentation, no visible learning curve, no period of architectural hesitation, just arrival. Then normality resumes. Later buildings shrink, materials cheapen, craft simplifies, details disappear. History tells us this is progress. But the stones do not seem to agree. Some of these structures carry marks of repair rather than construction, as if they were inherited, not invented, adapted, not conceived. Windows filled in, floors raised, original entrances buried below new ground levels. We are told these are renovations, modernizations, urban growth. But the question remains, why would a young industrial society begin by building at its most ambitious and then forget how? Why would the greatest scale come first and the smallest follow? The past usually grows slowly. It experiments. It improves. Here, the pattern is reversed. What we see suggests memory, not innovation. Repetition, not discovery. An echo of something already known. The buildings stand quietly. They do not argue. They do not explain themselves. They only remain. And in their silence, they ask a question history rarely pauses to answer. Who was already here before the story officially begins? When historians describe construction in the 19th century, they speak of limitation, limited tools, limited transport, limited coordination. Stone was heavy. Iron was expensive. And yet the buildings we are discussing behave as if none of that applied. Blocks weighing tens of tons lifted into place with no visible tolerance for error. Columns stacked so precisely that light cannot pass between joints. Arches spanning distances that even today demand caution. These were not frontier experiments. They were not rough attempts. They are confident. In many cities, these structures occupy the most prominent land. Central squares, high ground, river crossings. As if the builders understood geography deeply. As if placement mattered more than ownership. What is missing is not material. It is process. Where are the quarries that supplied such volume? Where are the roads worn down by transport? Where are the generations of workers learning through failure? We are shown photographs of men standing proudly beside finished monuments. But rarely do we see the building itself in progress. The story skips the hardest part. Official timelines compress decades of effort into a paragraph, sometimes into a sentence. It is assumed that necessity explains everything. But necessity does not teach proportion. It does not explain harmony. It does not produce repetition across continents. Because the same architectural language appears again and again. The same ratios, the same motifs, the same quiet discipline. Whether in North America, Europe, or distant colonial outposts, The buildings seem to recognize one another, as if they were built by people trained in the same inherited system, not a style, a grammar. And this grammar vanishes almost immediately after. Later buildings imitate the surface, but not the depth, not the balance, not the permanence. Something essential is missing. If this knowledge belonged to the 19th century, why did it die so quickly? If it was newly discovered, why was it never refined? Civilizations usually forget slowly. Here, the forgetting is abrupt, as if the builders were not replaced, but removed. Or as if those who remained no longer understood what they had inherited. The structures do not feel like products of ambition. They feel like remnants of continuity, a continuity that no longer exists. There is another detail history rarely dwells on. Many of these structures were not celebrated when they first appeared. They were not announced as triumphs of a new age. They were simply there, often described as existing buildings, repurposed for new governments, new institutions, new names, capitals, universities, libraries, museums, all housed within architecture that feels older than the function assigned to it. The interiors tell a similar story. Ceilings rise far above practical need. Rooms designed for acoustics before microphones existed. Stone staircases worn smooth as if by centuries of feet, not decades. Decoration is restrained, symbolic rather than decorative. Geometry dominates over ornament. This suggests a worldview where buildings were not statements, but instruments. Places where something was done, something repeated, something understood. Not factories, not offices, something closer to civic ritual. And then there's the matter of repair. Many 19th century records speak not of construction, but of restoration, of clearing debris, of replacing roofs, as if the structures predated the societies now claiming them. In some cases, old engravings show these buildings half buried, lower levels below ground, entrances submerged in earth. We are told this is the result of urban development, raised street level, flood control. But it happens too often, in too many places, with too much consistency. Entire floors lost. If soil accumulation was gradual, why do we not see gradual adaptation? Instead, we see abrupt transitions. Old windows sealed, new doors cut higher, basements forgotten. This is not how active builders behave. It is how inheritors behave. People who arrive after the fact. People working around something they did not fully create. The buildings remain patient. They do not demand recognition. They only endure. And endurance is not a 19th century virtue. Cultures that built for memory, not profit. If we stop asking who financed these structures and begin asking who understood them, the picture shifts. Because scale alone does not build permanence. Understanding does. The stones are set with intention, loads distributed with an ease that suggests long familiarity, arches placed where they want to be, not where they are forced. This is not trial and error. It is tradition. Traditions are not invented overnight. They're carried, passed hand to hand, master to apprentice. But the 19th century shows little evidence of such a lineage at this level. There are no long guild records describing this knowledge being born, no gradual rise toward mastery. Instead, there is a sudden presence of mastery itself. Then, silence. Afterward, architectural manuals become theoretical. Rules replace intuition. Calculations replace feel. The buildings change. They become thinner, lighter, more fragile, easier to destroy. Something else fades as well. The sense that architecture once served the land, that it aligned with wind, water, and light without instruments. Older structures seem to listen to their environment. Later ones impose themselves upon it. This is not an improvement. It is a shift in relationship. If the builders of these great works were truly 19th century citizens, why did their understanding leave no descendants? Why was the knowledge not taught, only documented? Because documentation is what follows loss. It is what remains when living memory breaks. The buildings do not feel like the first of their kind. The final expressions of something already fading. A system once shared widely, then fragmented, then forgotten. And when it was gone, only the shells remained. There is a reason these structures unsettle us. They do not belong to a story of invention. They belong to a story of inheritance. Across many regions, records describe sudden reuse of monumental buildings, as if cities grew around them rather than from them, as if people adapted themselves to forms already fixed. This is subtle but important. Civilizations that build tend to leave clutter, mistakes, abandoned attempts. Civilizations that inherit tend to leave gaps. Gaps in explanation, gaps in authorship, gaps in purpose. Many of these buildings seem oversized for the populations supposedly using them. Too many halls, too much volume, too much attention to symmetry for simple administration. They appear designed for a civic life larger than what later generations could sustain, as if the society that understood their full use was no longer present. Look closely, and you see signs of downgrading. Grand halls divided by temporary walls. Open spaces converted into storage. Precision patched with convenience. This is not expansion. It is reduction. And yet the core remains untouched, because it cannot be replicated. The 19th century may have named these buildings, occupied them, documented them. But naming is not the same as knowing. There is a difference between ownership and authorship, between use and understanding. When knowledge is lost, structures become mysterious without changing at all. They stay exactly where they are. Only the people around them change. And so history tells a story of progress, while architecture tells a story of decline. The contradiction deepens. If modernity was rising, why does everything built afterward feel temporary? Why do the oldest structures stand longest? Why does the past appear more durable than the future it was meant to serve? These are not accusations. They are observations, quiet ones, the kind that stone invites. At some point, every civilization reaches a moment of forgetting, not through catastrophe alone, but through quiet replacement. New systems arrive. New priorities take hold. Old knowledge becomes unnecessary or inconvenient. The structures remain, but their language is no longer spoken. What once required understanding is reduced to maintenance. What once aligned with nature is measured only by cost. And so the past is renamed. Old becomes primitive. Inherited becomes invented. Memory becomes myth. The 19th century may have stood at such a threshold, a moment when something very old was still standing, but no longer understood. The builders were gone. The knowledge fragmented. The world view shifted. What remained was architecture without context. Too large, too precise, too permanent. History chose the simplest explanation. It always does. They wait. They weather storms that modern materials cannot. They outlast systems designed to replace them. Not because they are magical, but because they were made within a different relationship to time. One where permanence was expected, where decay was anticipated, where rebuilding was not assumed. We do not need to know who built them to feel the absence. We only need to notice what no longer exists. The continuity, the patience, the quiet confidence in stone. When we ask who built structures too large for 19th century societies, we are not really asking about builders. We are asking about a lost way of seeing, one that left no manifestos, no proclamations, only evidence, standing silently in our cities, waiting for observation, not belief.